Our guest today is an author, a rabbi, a truth teller, and a fisherman. We're talking with Rabbi Steve Leder. You're connected with the Heart of Hospice. I'm Helen Bauer, here with Jerry Finter.
Whether you're a family caregiver or an end-of-life professional, we're here to enhance your hospice experience by connecting you with information you can use about end-of-life care. Today's episode is sponsored by our friends at GrandPad. Do you have an older family member who's isolated, or do you feel disconnected from a senior loved one who lives at a distance? The folks at GrandPad have come up with the perfect solution, an easy-to-use device that connects older adults with family and friends using video chat, email, photo sharing, and more. Visit grandpad.net for details.
You got to watch out for today's guest.
Oh, why is that?
He's a mess.
Yeah, we know this.
Which in Texas means you're awesome.
That's true. That is very true. Here in the South, when we say that somebody's a mess, we like them.
That's right. That means they're interesting, they're intelligent, and they're funny. Rabbi Steve Leder is all of those things.
We were privileged to meet Rabbi Steve Leder through a friend of ours, a mutual friend, and he has been a wonderful guest and so thoughtful in the conversations that he had with us. So amazing with the kind of insights that he has. I've been reading his book called The Beauty of What Remains. It is incredible. It just makes me want to say to somebody, you've got to read this. You look at this page, read this chapter. There's so much good content in it.
Right. Wisdom on every page like that.
Absolutely.
Some good takeaway each time. So Rabbi Steve Leder, he currently serves as the senior rabbi of Wilshire Boulevard Temple. It's a prestigious synagogue in Los Angeles with 2 campuses and 2,400 families. He has written several books, actually. His first book was called The Extraordinary Nature of Ordinary Things. His second book, More Money Than God, Living a Rich Life Without Losing Your Soul. And his third book, the one that really is the inspiration for his interview with us today, More Beautiful Than Before, How Suffering Transforms Us, was number 4 on Amazon's bestseller in its first week. And the book we're really focusing on today is The Beauty of What Remains, What Death Teaches Us About Life.
He really takes his own personal story of the death of his father and helps to transform this event into something very beautiful. And so I think you're going to love this conversation with Rabbi Steve Leder. Steve, we are so happy to have you on the Heart of Hospice podcast. Welcome.
Thank you. I am really, really pleased to be with you today.
Well, we are looking forward to hearing more about you, more about the work that you do and the books that you have written as well. But let's start off with this question. You've been at the bedside of many people who were going down the road toward the end of their life. So how was being at the bedside of so many people who were dying change the way that you view death?
Let me preface this by saying that when I am at the bedside of a person who is actively dying, I always ask, are you afraid? I want them to be able to share that with me if they are. And if they aren't, I want their family to hear and to know that. Now, my experience is my experience and anecdotal. But not once in 35 years of asking that question, and probably literally close to 1,000 dying people, not one person has said yes when I've asked if he or she was afraid.
Interesting.
Now, they have fears, but not for themselves. They're afraid for their spouse, their children, their business, their whatever. But their fear is not for themselves and not about dying. Now, again, this is for people who are actively dying, a day or two. And how has that changed my view of dying? Well, it's really helped me make peace with dying And it's also, now this is counterintuitive. A lot of people come to me as a rabbi and say, I have this fear of death. And I said, well, let me give you some good news. If you're afraid of dying, it's not your day. Anxiety is for the living. Okay? When you are really, really dying, you will be at peace with it. And obviously, some people do die suddenly and unexpectedly. You get hit by a bus or something. Well, you won't be afraid then either because you didn't know it was going to happen. So in almost every case when you are literally dying, there's an overwhelming sense of peace and even rightness to it. It's often a way to end suffering. It's often a way to transcend what life becomes when your life shrinks to the square footage of a hospital bed. But generally speaking, it has really, really reduced, if not removed, my fear of my own death, because I know when I'm really dying, I'll be okay with it. It will be time for me to die.
Yeah, that's a really interesting perspective. I have never thought about it like that, that the fear of dying is really only for the living.
That's right.
Yeah, that's one of the lessons that working with the dying teaches you.
Yeah.
Very true. Very true.
And by the way, there are many things worse than dying. Many.
I would agree with that as well.
Anybody that's been in a hospital, anybody that's, seen the kind of pain that certain types of disease and injury can cause, even today, with the best pain management in the world, or what it takes to keep a person alive when they're 95, 96, 97, 90, and 98 years old. There are many things worse than dying.
Yes.
Yeah, that's true. Steve, I've been reading your book, your latest book called The Beauty of What Remains. And you talk about the death of your father, your dad. And I find it very interesting how you looked at that and how it affected you. What was it about the personal loss of your father that changed what you thought about suffering and death?
In a sense, the whole book is about this journey from the experience of a death as rabbi, in other words, a vicarious experience, a professional experience, and how much I thought that had taught me about death and loss and grief, and how little of that was true when I wasn't Steve Leder the rabbi, I was Steve Leder the son. There's a duality to death. There's a duality to memory. There's a duality to grief and love that I only understood one side of. And I don't know how much time we have, but I'll be glad to go into, maybe the 3 or 4 major readjustments that this journey from rabbi to son caused me to make.
Yeah, we would like for you to do that. And in fact, in your book, you tell the story about the sermon that you gave.
Right. So that's actually the backstory of the book. So on my 30th anniversary on the pulpit at Wilshire Boulevard Temple, at a service we call Kol Nidre, which is the eve of Yom Kippur. It's the holiest night of the year for Jews. And when it comes to sermons, it's kind of like the Super Bowl of sermons, right? And I decided on the 30th anniversary, which was 5 years ago, of my being on the pulpit there, that I would give a sermon about the 10 things death had taught me about life after 30 years of seeing so much death up close. And I chose that night, by the way, because Yom Kippur, a lot of Jews don't even know this, it's the Jewish Day of the Dead. The whole evening and day of Yom Kippur is meant to force us to contemplate our deaths so that we will change our lives. I'll give you a few quick examples. The service begins by removing the 3 Torah scrolls from the ark, the kind of cabinet where they're kept on the pulpit. Well, those 3 scrolls represent the 3 judges in the heavenly tribunal that we will make an account of our lives in front of. This is all, of course, metaphorical. The word for that ark, that place where those scrolls are kept, in Hebrew is aron, which is the same word for casket. So there we are standing in front of the 3 judges staring into an empty casket, right? We wear white on Yom Kippur because it mimics the burial shroud, the white linen burial shroud that traditional Jews are buried in. We fast because the dead neither eat nor drink. We recite a certain prayer that asks between now and the next Yom Kippur, who shall live, who shall die, who shall wander, who shall die by water, by fire, by plague, all of these things. And so, and in the afternoon, there's a service to remember our loved ones who have died in the past year. So the whole thing is nothing but thinking about death so that we change our lives. And that's why I gave the sermon that day. 1 year later, I still have trouble sometimes with this.
It's okay.
You just couldn't make this up. 1 year later to the day, the morning of the next Yom Kippur Eve, we buried my father in Minneapolis after his 10-year journey through Alzheimer's. And I realized in that journey from rabbi the year before to son the year of, how wrong I was about so many things in that sermon that everyone loved and thought was great, by the way. But you know, there's this old Yiddish expression, a half-truth is a whole lie. That sermon was full of half-truths. And so I wrote this book in a way as a form of an apology for what I had told half-truths about, and as a way of really, really being honest about death and grief and loss. And the good and the bad, which is why I called it the beauty of what remains, because it reveals so much beauty. Kafka said the meaning of life is that it ends. It's true.
Yeah.
So what were the major readjustments? The first was about grief itself. So I'm 61 years old, and my generation, and we're all 3 of us of the same generation, more or less, our generation, when it came to death and dying and grief and loss, we were all raised under the umbrella of the thinking of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, who was the first to really delve into this. And she wrote these books, The 5 Stages of Death and Dying, right? And saying that something happens in stages implies that it is a linear process.
Right.
First, you'll feel A, then B, then C, then D, then E, and then you're done. You're at the end of your grief. And that implies there is a correct and incorrect way to grieve. It also implies that there's an end to it. And I say in the book, anyone who thinks the shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line doesn't understand grief. Because grief is nonlinear. So there's a chapter in the book called An Ocean of Grief, because for me, the wave metaphor is far closer to the truth. Grief is like waves in the sense that in the beginning, they come very close together and they're very large and they're very aggressive. And with time, they do grow further apart. But it is also true that you can have beautiful calm seas for days, weeks, months, years even. And then one day when your back is turned, this rogue wave of grief can just rise up and crash down on you. I see this at weddings when the grandfather of the bride is there watching and he's weeping. And why is he weeping? Because this young girl's grandmother isn't there. And he's been fine. He's remarried. He's been fine for 15, 20 years. And then this loss just crashes in. And so I think it's a healthier way to think about grief. Now, this changed my approach with people as a rabbi, too, made me a better rabbi. In this sense, I used to say to people, for example, particularly when it was the death of a child, which is the most difficult thing I ever walk through people with. Before my father died, I would have sat you down in the chapel before the service and said, listen, the most honest and helpful thing I can say to you right now is, it won't always hurt so much. That's what I used to say. And then my dad died. Now what I would say to you is, listen, the most honest and helpful thing I can say to you right now is it won't always hurt so often. That's the truth.
Right.
The other is a lie. Because when it hurts, it really hurts. Now, to extend this wave metaphor in terms of how it changed me. So the old Steve Leder, right? When I saw a wave coming at me, my default setting was, I'm going to plant my feet here in the sand. I'm going to stick my chest out, and I'm going to hold my ground because I am stronger than any wave. And we all know what eventually happens to such a person. Some kind of wave comes in, and it just throws you over upside down, gasping for air, smashes you against the rocks. You're lost, gasping for air. And this teaches us that there is a better way, a better default setting for waves, which is when the wave is coming, you recognize it, you lie down, and you just let it wash over you. And you float with it until you can stand up again. And the other thing I learned is that if you reach your hand out when you're floating in this pain, very often there's someone standing next to you who will reach back and help lift you from that suffering. You know, the Talmud says the prisoner cannot free himself. So powerful, right? We have to reach out. And there's a humility that comes with grief, that we have to reach out. And my life is better because I now let the waves wash over me and I reach out for help. That's the first thing, this reassessment of grief. The second thing is an honest perspective on the duality of memory. So all clergy, I think, are full of these platitudes about memory. You know, may her memory be a blessing. You'll always have her in your heart and memories. And you had so many good memories. Yeah, okay. That's all true. Memory is beautiful. But it is also true that it is so painful sometimes to remember. There's a duality to memory. There's a dissonance that cannot be resolved. In the book, I say it's like being caressed and spat on at the same time. That's memory. Now, you can't resolve that duality, that dissonance, but being honest about it helps us to make peace with it, which is its own kind of resolution. Right? Oh, I know what this is. This is the duality of memory. This is the bittersweet part of being human. Ah, okay. I can live with this. So that's the second thing. The third thing is so obvious you would think any clergy person would know it. But, you know, we're often standing knee deep in a river and just dying of thirst. You know, that's just the human condition. I actually think the pandemic taught all of us what I'm about to say. Because during the pandemic, I don't know about you guys, but I found myself saying I love you to so many more people and so effortlessly. I mean, every Zoom, every phone call, I love you. I really love you. I love you, you know, and I meant it. And I always felt this way about people, but I didn't say it. I wasn't as effusive or grateful. And, you know, my dad died twice. People with Alzheimer's die twice.
That's right.
And at the end, you know, the person who was my father was gone about 3 to 4 years before his body died. And my father and I learned a new language toward the end of his life, which was the language of touch. Because he had lost the ability to speak, and he couldn't make sense of much. He was in his own reality. So I would sit next to him in his wheelchair in the nursing home for hours and just hold his hand. And it was beautiful. And it was a new language for both of us. And it was very real. And so this third realization, which of course we all should know all along, is, no matter how many times we say, I love you, and no matter how many times we hold and are held by the people we love, it's never enough. It's never enough. Do it more. Say it more. I didn't get to see my mom for almost 3 years because of the pandemic. She's in an assisted living place in Minnesota. I live in LA. They wouldn't let anyone in. Love each other. Hold each other. Now, the last thing is also partly why I called the book The Beauty of What Remains, because, okay, to understand this, you have to understand that my father and I look almost identical. We looked almost identical at each stage of our lives. So, for example, if you saw a picture of me at 25 years old and a picture of my dad at 25 years old, you would have a hard time telling the difference. Okay? So, before my dad's funeral service began, we were put in a room at the synagogue. The casket was in the sanctuary. We were put in a room, my family, I'm one of 5. All of us were there with my mom and our spouses and our kids. And at Jewish funerals, the casket is always closed, but you have an opportunity to view the body before the casket is closed and the service begins. And so the young rabbi walks into the room to walk us into the sanctuary to see my father's body in the casket. And I remember in that moment thinking to myself, I know exactly how the rabbi feels right now. But I have no idea how I feel. And then we approached the casket. Now understand, I literally had stood next to 1,000 families looking at the body of their loved one before. And to be honest, it never really fazed me very much. I could have eaten a sandwich. It didn't affect me. I mean, I felt for them, but I was detached from it. It wasn't my loved one.
Right.
But approaching the casket when it was my father's body, and it was my 1,000 bodies of experience meant nothing. So I approached the casket and I looked down and I put my hand on my dad's chest. I looked at him. And my first thought was, that's how I'm going to look when I'm dead and my son is bending over my casket. I am going to die. Now, I was a death professional by this point, but I never really grasped the whole truth and nothing but the truth that I am going to die. And that realization has changed my life for the better. So much better. So again, this duality of death. It takes away so much, but it also reveals so much in that taking away. It's a very powerful kind of essentialism. And was it painful? Terribly. Has it made my life more meaningful and beautiful? Beyond measure.
I think you have touched us so much already. This is powerful and so deep. Your book has so much in it that it's almost impossible for us to really even begin to get into the depths of it here. But what would you say is, as the author, as the one who wrote this book, what would you say is the most important thing you want people to receive from it?
I'm going to describe it in terms of something theologians call via negationis, by way of the negative. This is a kind of medieval theology which sort of posits, though, the way to understand God is by understanding what God is not. Right? God is not capricious. God is not evil. God is not corporeal. And by describing what something isn't, you get to what it is. Via negationis, right? Well, the way I think about this is that we're all so busy adding to our lives. More projects, more stress, more work, more kids, more driving and shopping. And death is the great teacher of essentialism, of the stripping away of nonsense, right? So I think of it kind of like just imagine the most beautiful marble sculpture you've ever seen in your life in a museum. How did that sculpture begin? It began as a solid block of marble. And it took an incredibly skilled artist to remove everything that wasn't beautiful, chip by chip by chip, everything that wasn't that statue. That beauty was hiding within that block of marble all along, hiding in plain sight, but it could only be revealed by what was removed. And ideally, death is the wake-up call for the living to artfully and skillfully remove and remove and remove, so that, as much as possible, it's beauty that remains in our lives. And you can think about this another way. I obviously spent a lot of time in cemeteries, and I'm always amazed by this simple fact. We all are unique individuals and lead unique lives. But if you walk through a cemetery, almost every headstone says the same thing. I mean, there are a few funny ones that are outliers, but generally speaking, when you have to define a person's life with 15 characters per line and 4 lines total,
right,
you get down to some pretty essential things about what matters. And what do they all say? Loving wife, mother, grandmother, friend. Loving husband, father, grandfather, friend. Or brother or sister, right? It ultimately comes down to this tiny handful. And do any of us really have more than a tiny handful of relationships that make our lives meaningful and beautiful? And yet, we spend so much of our time and energy on the things that don't remain. And it's hard not to, because we live in a culture that is so seductive, so distracting, so maddening. Why is everyone's dark little secret that they enjoyed lockdown and COVID? Why? Well, because they got to eat dinner at home with the people they love every night, and they didn't have to go out socializing with people they don't care about.
Right.
And they weren't on the freeway, and they appreciated holding and being held. And they took a walk, and they heard birds, and they saw that weeds are actually flowers. And somehow we were all kind of a little embarrassed to talk about it. Well, I'm not. It was beautiful. The stripping away left so much beauty behind. And if that isn't the lesson of death and loss and grief, then we have failed as the student, because death is a powerful teacher.
So I see a parallel when in hospice as a nurse, you see a patient as they lose pieces of themselves, as disease takes that, right? As they move towards their death. There are little pieces, layers that are stripped away piece by piece until it's simply the person. Their identities, their roles that they've played, those relationships, as moneymakers, house managers, the jobs they had, the hobbies they had, the things that they have to leave behind. And
the crap they collected.
Exactly. Yeah. Those roles that aren't essential anymore, until what it comes down to is, I am here, hopefully with just the ones I love. This is the simplicity of who I am as a human being. And that's what remains.
That's right. That's right. And there is a duality to it, of course, because it's also painful.
Yes. It feels like loss.
Yeah. Yes. And it is. The question is, can we make also some gain of it? And by the way, I'm not here to tell you that any of these insights are worth what we go through to achieve them. All I'm saying is neither are they worth less. I often say to people, if you have to walk through hell, don't come out empty-handed.
So the key would be to do all of this, to do death without the suffering.
Well, look, physical suffering, absolutely. There's a chapter in the book, since we're talking about hospice here, that did cause a lot of controversy in the Jewish world. Because it's chapter 4, which is called "When More Is Not Better." We tend to think of, well, if life is great, then more is better.
Right.
And this is the story of my being called to the bedside of a woman who I'd known for 30 years, who had ALS. And in California, we have compassionate death legislation, and so with the permission of 2 doctors and a psychiatrist, you can, and if you are likely to die within 6 months, you can get the medication to end your life. Now, this woman had told her husband that she would only take the medication if I gave her my blessing, if I said it was okay. And that when the time came, she wanted him to call me. So I get this phone call. I'm on the freeway coming back from a clergy retreat, tired, sitting in traffic, saying unrabbinic things in traffic. And it's her husband. Let's call him Stephen. He says, Rabbi Tara asked if you would come over because she wants to take the medication, but she won't do it unless you say it's okay. So I get through the traffic. I head for the house. I walk into the house, and you know from what you both do, you can tell the house of a person who is terminally ill. It's the antiseptic smell, the stack of adult diapers in the corner, the bedpan. You can feel it everywhere, even the ramp at the front door. So I go to Tara's bedside, and she looks at me with this grimace and these pleading eyes, and she'd lost the ability to speak intelligibly like a week before. But the day before I got there, she lost the ability to even point to letters on a chart and communicate. So there was going to be no conversation. I just held her hand and looked in her eyes. And I just said, I understand why you wanted to see me. I wanted to go out in the hallway for a minute and talk to Stephen, and her daughter was there too. And then I'll be back. So I went into the hallway, and I said to them, listen, as the rabbi, Jewish law forbids active euthanasia, because according to Jewish law, There is no relative value to life. All lives are of equal value, whether you have 10 minutes to live or 10 decades to live, whether you have Down syndrome or won the Nobel Prize, all life is of equal value, period, full stop. Passive euthanasia is allowed. Like, you can stop doing certain things, but you can't actively hasten a person's death, according to Jewish law. And I explained this to them. And I said, but I don't know how I can walk in there and treat Tara with less compassion than my dog. So I'm going to go in there and tell her it's okay. Now, this is another form of duality. This is, again, this tension. Doctors call it role stress, right? This is why doctors will never answer when you ask them, what would you do if it was your mother? What do they say? They say, well, it's not my mother, so I can't tell you.
Right.
They dodge it because it's too much role stress for them. So I went in there and I said, Tara, it's okay. You can take the medication. And I stayed a few more minutes, then I left. And about 2 hours later, my phone rings at home. And it's Stephen, and he says to me, thank you, Rabbi Leder. Thank you so much, Rabbi Leder. Tara's gone, and it was so peaceful. Thank you, Rabbi. And as I say in the book, Stephen was calling Rabbi Steve Leder. But it was Steve Leder, the son, who answered the phone. And, this caused some conflict in the Jewish world, because how could a rabbi openly publish something like this? But again, this is another example, I think, of this tension and duality that death presents that brings out the best in us, not the worst. It brought out the humanity in me that transcends my role as a rabbi.
Exactly.
And I'm proud of that. I'm not ashamed of it.
Yeah, there has to be compassion. There has to be that compassion that's a part of our role as faith leaders. And sure, we understand the teaching. We get it. We've been through all that. And yet there's also the compassion. And isn't that what it teaches us anyway, is about the compassion? Yes.
Yes. So, again, it's the power that death reveals in life and in us. And, part of the way I think to grasp it is to think about what life would be if it was endless. What would we be like if we were deathless creatures?
Mm.
I'll tell you what I think. I think there would be no ambition. No one would have children. No one would get married. Not no one, but I think those things would just be gone. And I think there would be no art or music. There'd be no reason to create. There'd be no reason to consider one's legacy. I think life would be something other than human if we were deathless creatures.
Very interesting concept.
Is that what we want? Really?
Yeah.
I don't.
No.
During the pandemic, older adults who live alone have been more isolated than ever. My mom is the perfect example. She lives in a senior living community that went into lockdown, not only requiring her to stay in her apartment, but also restricting all of her family from visiting. GrandPad gave us the perfect solution to stay connected. Using the video chat option, we were able to see my mom and really know how she was. All of us in her private family network were able to share photos and messages about what we were doing, so she knew we were okay. My mom was really skeptical about using the device at first. She still has a flip phone and doesn't even own a computer. GrandPad comes with a 4G LTE cellular service already included, so there is no need for Wi-Fi. All of us in my mom's private network have shared photos and videos. We even sent her special videos on her 88th birthday, even though we couldn't celebrate in person. Mom has learned to use email, play bridge and solitaire, and listen to music she loves on her GrandPad. We are so grateful to the folks at GrandPad for allowing us to stay connected. You can purchase a GrandPad subscription for your loved one at grandpad.net. Now on to today's episode.
Well, lest people think that your book is just filled with a lot of sadness and this deep thinking about death, you throw a lot of jokes in there as well.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Tell us your favorite joke that you put in the book.
Okay, let me tell you my favorite joke that's literally starts the next book. Okay, the next book comes out in June, and it's called For You and I Am Gone. And it's about how to create an ethical will or legacy letter. So I asked 12 questions that people should ask themselves and answer for their children or their loved ones if you don't have children. And to make the case why I think this, what really was the impetus for this book is that I didn't know my last conversation with my father was my last conversation with my father. I didn't know that on this visit he could speak and on my next visit he wouldn't really speak again. You really never know. And so there's this idea that we should write down our values, our hopes, our dreams, our life lessons for the people we love when we're gone. So I start the book with this joke, okay? This guy's having his annual physical. And doctor says, yeah, you look good. Everything checks out. How you doing? So I'm doing okay, but I think my wife has a hearing problem. And I don't know what to do about it. So the doctor said, all right, I'll give you a simple test to try when you get home. You tell me how it goes, and then we'll kind of figure out the next move. But this is a down and dirty diagnostic test. I want you to walk in the door when you get home. And if your wife's like standing, let's say, in the kitchen at the sink with her back to the front door, I want you to stand about 30 feet away and ask her what's for dinner. If she doesn't answer, I want you to move about 15 feet away and ask her what's for dinner. If she still doesn't answer, I want you to get right behind her and raise your voice and ask her a third time, like, what's for dinner? This guy says, okay. Goes home, comes in the front door. He's about 30 feet away. His wife's at the sink with her back to him, and he says, what's for dinner? No answer. So he moves up 15 feet. What's for dinner? Silence. Finally, he moves up right behind her, and he yells, what's for dinner? And she turns around, she says, I told you 3 fucking times, chicken. So I use that joke as a way of saying that we assume people are listening and can hear us, but often they aren't listening and they can't hear us. And this includes your loved ones, who really will want to know the depths of your love and values and teaching when you're gone. So let's write some of this down, basically. And then I write about, I came up with 12 questions to ask oneself. They're the questions I ask families to help me prepare the eulogy for their loved one. Because, obituaries tell us the facts of a person's life, but not the truths. The fact that I was born on June 3rd in 1960 in St. Louis Park, Minnesota, that doesn't tell you any of my truth. It's just a fact. So the whole book is about getting to the truth of your life, sharing it with the people you love, and then asking yourself, am I living in alignment with what I say I believe? But it all starts with that joke. I told you 3 fucking times, chicken. I got plenty more where that came from, by the way. Plenty more. You want to hear one more that's in the book, that The Beauty of What Remains?
Yes,
sure.
Please.
Okay. You don't have to use it on the podcast if you don't want.
Okay.
I just like you guys. Okay. So there are these 3 elderly women at the assisted living complex sitting out by the pool. And off in the corner, they see a guy sound asleep on a chaise lounge on his back, totally naked, except he's got a towel over his face and, a towel over his groin. So one of the women says, "Who's that guy over there?" Another one says, "I don't know. Let's go find out." So they walk over, guy sound asleep. The first woman lifts the towel over his groin, takes a look, puts the towel back, and she says, "It's not my husband." The second woman steps up, lifts the towel, takes a good look, puts it back, and she says, "Not my husband." Third woman steps up, lifts the towel, takes a long look, puts the towel back, and she says, "He doesn't even live in the complex."
Oh my gosh, that is so bad.
It's in the book.
Yeah, it's in the book.
So that makes it okay.
Yeah, so much for the solemnity, the sacred conversation that we were having. That's hilarious.
I always tell jokes when I love jokes because they say so much, and I always tell people jokes when I visit them at the hospital or whatever. I'm just myself. I think that's what people want and what they need.
Absolutely. Humor has to be a part of this whole process, or how would we ever make it through any of it?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. So I've been going through your book and I've loved it. I think it's chapter 2. It's Showing Up is the chapter.
Yes.
And I have to say, this is a lot of what I try to teach the chaplains that I lead. And one of your comments is, do not waste the rest of your loved one's life worrying about his or her death, which makes a really good point. It's, treat the person that's like they're fully alive. Don't treat them as somebody who's dead, or dying rather, but somebody who's still alive. And then the other point was, travel back with your loved one. Talk to them about their memories. Go back in time with them and those happy times, those times that felt good for them. And what we call it in hospice is doing a life review.
Right.
Helping them find
I call it a mental vacation.
Yeah, that's perfect. That's perfect. I like that. And then the one that we just talked about is, you said, go for the laugh if you possibly can.
Yeah.
Go for the laugh.
Yeah, because laughter is the decision to survive.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever it is, it's going to get better, right?
Right.
That's what laughter is.
Yeah, I love that chapter. I loved it very much. It was very, very good. And I think most chaplains would do well to read that chapter. They really would. So we're really looking forward to this next book that's coming out that you've already discussed a little bit about, the 12 questions, the 12 essential questions to tell a life story. So when is it coming out again?
The book will come out on June 7th. And it's called For You When I Am Gone, 12 Essential Questions to Tell a Life Story. And what I did was I wrote an essay about each of these questions, and then I invited about 40 people to also respond to these questions, and then I curated their responses. And I'm talking about people of all faiths, all gender identities, all ethnicities, all of it. And famous people and people, who had been in prison, and people who no one's ever heard of or ever would. And then we curated their responses. And then I put a sort of end cap on each chapter. And if you go through this book and then answer the questions for yourself, you will have everything you need to leave an ethical will or legacy letter for your loved ones. And, the editor said, "How long did it take you to come up with these questions?" And I said, "About 15 minutes.
Right.
So what do you mean? I said, "I've been asking these questions of families at what clergy call an intake. When you sit with a family to prepare them for the funeral and to get what you need to write a eulogy of truths, not facts, these are the questions I ask, and these are the kinds of questions that really tell us who a person was and still is." And that's really the genesis of the whole thing. So I've written mine to my kids, and it's bound with our estate plan. They don't get to the money till they read this first. That's the way it is. Because the truth is, honestly, from the current book, there's a chapter called Nobody Wants Your Crap, and the double entendre is intended. But it's really true that, we spend our lives collecting whatever, the paperweights, the fountain pens, the, stick pins, whatever. Your kids don't want that stuff. They really don't. Most of my father's possessions ended up in a heap on the floor in the basement, and even the Goodwill only wanted half of it. What they really need from us when we're physically gone is our loving guidance and the truth about our mistakes and our values and our hopes for them. That's what they need. That's what I need from my dad today.
Right.
I was thinking about talking with you both today, and I was thinking about, what do I physically have from my dad? None of it. I think if you put it all together, it's not worth more than, $15. But it's his hat that he always wore in the desert when we would visit him. It's his Shriner's cap with the tassel from when he would take us to the circus, the Shrine Circus, when we were little kids. It's a mug with my name on it. It's a picture of us fishing together. These things aren't things. They're vessels for memory.
Right. It's legacy.
Yeah.
In your blog, you describe a pipe wrench. Your dad had a lot of tools. He was a hard worker, worked hard all his life. And there was a pipe wrench with the name Aaron that was engraved on it. And Aaron is your son.
Yeah.
And they had played what you called hardware store with your dad's tools.
Yep.
And so really, it wasn't about the pipe wrench. It really had nothing to do with the pipe wrench. It was a memory, a legacy that a grandfather created by playing with his grandson, and they were playing store, and he was teaching him about the different tools, and it ended up being something so much more precious than the actual pipe wrench.
And it's also a beautiful memory for me because the grandfather my children had was not the father I had.
Right.
And so those memories of him as a grandfather really helped sort of round the sharp edges of my childhood memories of my dad, which were far less joyful and loving.
Right.
Yeah. I think that might be true for a lot of people.
Yeah. And I don't blame him. You're right. Jerry, I think most of us end up, if we're lucky enough to have grandchildren, being different with our grandchildren than we were with our children. It's a different level of responsibility, and we have a lot more wisdom, generally a lot more sleep, and maybe more money, like some of the pressures of young parents aren't upon the grandparents. But in any case, you're exactly right. It's it's not the thing itself. These are vessels for memory. To think that things have real value. I tell people it's like trying to eat a picture of food. It's close, but it's not real. It's a kind of idolatry almost, It doesn't really nourish you, things. And listen, I like money and stuff as much as the next guy. I love peaty single malt scotch. I collect rock and roll, black and white rock and roll photography. Whatever. I like a good foot massage, whatever. I like things. But I don't privilege them in value above love and emotion and connection. And frankly, now, I don't really want anything anymore. I don't buy stuff anymore. I buy fertilizer for my flower garden because the flowers and gardening brings me a lot of peace. But I don't know. Do you guys still collect stuff? There's a point at which it's like, what am I going to do with all this crap?
Right. Yeah. Right. That's true.
And my kids will even tell me, make sure you don't leave that to us.
Yeah, we don't want it.
We don't want it. We don't want your crap. Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. Right. But doesn't that all go back to stripping away?
Yes.
Down to our human identities.
those headstones never say like your zip code or your resume or your net worth or your grandchild's GPA at college. None of that.
Yeah. Steve Leder, his 401k was this much.
Right, right.
Nobody puts that on there.
It's not that money's unimportant. It's just that it should be a means to an end result of loving relationships.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And of caring for other people. You know, the solution to poverty is money. So, you know, use it.
Mm-hmm.
Use it to uplift the poor.
Yeah, absolutely. Steve, you have blessed our world with your writing. And I have to say, I have really thoroughly enjoyed reading your book. And even after the interview, I plan to finish reading it. I haven't finished it yet, so I plan to finish it. And we are also looking forward to the next book to come out.
Yeah.
That one's, at 62 years old, I think it might be time for me to to write some of these things down.
Yes.
And so thank you for the guidebook that you're going to provide for us, and we'll share that with our listeners as well. Any last words that you'd like to share with our listeners?
I'd like to thank both of you. You know, you're doing sacred, holy work. And it's more than work. You're guiding and comforting people through this valley of shadows, and it's beautiful. And not a lot of people are willing to walk through that valley and hold the hands of another. So I appreciate you and what you're doing, and the opportunity to talk with you and to support your mission, because hospice is, I'm a religious person, so I'll put it in religious terms. It's God's work that can only be done by human beings.
It's a privilege every day.
Yeah.
Every day.
And I can only speak for myself. I hope you feel the same. As hard as it is, and it is hard, there are days where it sucks the marrow out of your bones. But it does make life more meaningful and beautiful. A meaningful and beautiful life is not the same thing as an easy life.
Right. Yeah.
And I'll take meaning and beauty over ease every day.
Yeah, any day. That's
for sure. Steve, thank you. This has been such a privilege for us and just a joy. Thank you.
Thank you both. Thank you both. God bless.
So do you think he lived up to the hype, to our introduction?
Oh, absolutely.
Absolutely. He's funny.
He is.
Can we say unorthodox? Oh.
Oh, that's bad.
Steve, yeah, that was good. That's a joke. I got that one.
Forgive us for that one.
Yes. But the insights that he shares, the duality of having been present and witness to dying and death, but not fully understanding it. Remember, he said it was half truth, which is a lie, and then being present with his own father through their walk, his journey with Alzheimer's, and then through his death. And then he realized he gained a perspective that he never knew he didn't have.
Right. I love the wonderful illustrations that he uses, the thoughtfulness that goes into those illustrations. And I have to say, I personally understand the role switch that takes place when you serve as a hospice provider, but then you go through the experience of the death of someone that you love. In this case, it was my mother, and it changes who you are and how you work and relate in your profession.
And for the better.
For the better, absolutely.
For the better. You have a deeper empathy, because I think all hospice providers, all people who work in end-of-life care, whether you're a doula, an aide, I think we do have empathy. But to experience it with the depth that comes from having the knowledge of a personal loss, it deepens how you practice.
It does. I tell people that I was a hospice chaplain before my mom died, and I was a hospice chaplain after my mom died, but I wasn't the same hospice chaplain.
So I would go so far as to say you were probably a better hospice chaplain.
I hope so. I hope that I was.
Yeah.
I really do. But what Steve Leder has shared with us today has such meaning, I think, for many, many hospice providers.
Absolutely. So we want to tell you how to get in touch with Steve. You can check out his website, steveleder.com, and it's Steve Leder, LEDER.com. And if you're interested in his books, you can find them on Amazon. The Beauty of What Remains is on Amazon and at Barnes & Noble. And we would tell you to watch out in June of 2022 for his new book that he will have coming out, For You When I Am Gone, 12 Essential Questions to Tell a Life Story, all about how to write an ethical will.
Thanks for listening to The Heart of Hospice. I'm Jerry Fenter here with Helen Bauer. Because we know your hospice journey is 24/7, you can always find us at theheartofhospice.com. Subscribe to the podcast wherever you're listening and leave a rating or a review on Apple Podcasts.
To connect with us, just send an email to host@theheartofhospice.com. You can also find us on social media. And remember, no matter who you are or where you are in your hospice journey, you are the heart of hospice.